Hello friends, this is Worm, and I want to apologize for yesterday's lack of a video. I was really involved in the dungeon, stuff like that, but that's what we're going to talk about today. I wanted to talk about this dungeon because I think there are some things to be said about it, and so let's get into it. First of all, we have to acknowledge the setting, which for me personally, the setting of this dungeon is a 10 out of 10, 100%. Like the idea of going into a medieval castle, not some new like fortress, not like what was the last not into some modern era castle style thing, like legit, this is a like medieval castle, is absolutely fantastic. And in the castle there are things like dungeons, there are traps, it's littered with skulls, it's crumbling, like it's an amazing setting. Like I absolutely love the setting. I love that you can get to areas and just look out over the world and just see all these mountains. You can see a couple other castles off in the distance. It's just a beautiful setting, and I have zero complaints with the actual settings itself. Like it gives you this almost Dungeons and Dragons vibe, which, I mean, let's be honest, that's cool. I think that most people would agree that this is a fantastic setting. The arenas that you fight the bosses, I think are also very cool. The first boss, you have this really small arena. The second boss, you have this massive arena. And then the third area, the last boss, is just a crazy arena, right? Like it's comprised of multiple levels and all this stuff. Like I don't want to spoil too much, but it's very cool. The areas in between are really cool. You're going through, like I said, like dungeons like this right here. I'm going through all this maze of hallways and stuff, looking for things. Again, it is an absolutely fantastic setting. I would say definitely a 10 out of 10 for setting. Similar to Ghosts of the Deep. Ghosts of the Deep also had a fantastic setting. But moving on, while we're talking about setting, there's one thing I would have liked to see a little bit more of. Again, the setting is great, but the thing that I think we're missing is more exploration of this castle, right? Because, I mean, who doesn't want to explore an old abandoned, relatively abandoned castle, like, a medieval castle? And granted, there's a lot of places that we can go. We see it from across the way. We go to the dungeons here, we're trapped in the dungeon, then we're wandering through these halls, we get to walk across some of the keep. But man, like, I just want to see more exploration of this giant castle. I mean, you can't tell me that, for example, we see a ton of doors around the place, ton of doors that they don't open, you can't do anything with them. Like, how cool would it have been if Bungie just opened those and just added more areas with just more interesting scenes, various medieval themes in these rooms. That would have been super cool. Another thing I would have kind of liked to see more of is more fights like within the castle. The closest fight that we got like from the inside of the castle was like maybe the second encounter where you're at the gates of the castle. But like, how cool would it have been if we walk into like a mess hall, so to speak, and there's tables and stuff, and there's just a freaking giant boss in there. Like, that would have been really cool to see as well. Not complaining about the boss fights, in the boss settings, but that would have been cool, and exploration would have been really nice to have more of. But moving on from there, I also want to talk about the loot chests, which this is just an amazing idea that Bungie had. So within this raid, there are a ton of chests. As you can see, I think I just looked at one back there. There are tons of chests throughout the areas, but a bunch of them are trapped chests. Okay, Worm, trap chests, that's not that big of a deal. But one of the things that I noticed on my runs is that the trap chests are not always trapped in every single run, right? For example, there's a chest here in the dungeon, and the first time we ran through it, one of my teammates opened it and got blown up. I think it was actually this chest in this room right here. Opened the chest, got blown up, it was like, oh, well, that one's trapped, I guess. But as we went along, we kept opening and we found some that weren't trapped. But then I was going on another run a couple runs later, and I couldn't remember whether or not that chest was a trapped chest or not. When I opened it, and I got loot out of it, which is, I think that's just fantastic that Bungie, they change it every time. So, you know, you don't know, well, there's a way to know, but you know, you can't just say, oh yeah, we have to go here to this chest. Like it's worth it to go to every single chest location and just check to see if it's something you can open or not. I also thought the idea of like the mimic chests, like from Dark Souls, was such a fun idea here. But yeah, that's, you know, that's the setting. That's my thoughts on the setting and stuff like that. I want to talk about the actual encounters now, because again, the encounters were really awesome. The first boss there, you know, that small arena, the mechanics there, spoiler warning, just if you haven't done it yet and you don't want spoilers, but you know, the mechanic of teleporting you into the cage and having to shoot the blighted eyes before you get to the top and you get killed is such a unique and fun like idea. You know, having to stand in the inside of the little scorn, whatever they're called, like the wishing areas, right, and make wishes, so to speak. That's such a cool and neat aspect. And you know, on my first couple playthroughs, we were wondering what you do with those. You know, do you shoot them, you stand next to them? We found out, of course, you do have to stand next to them until they activate, but it's such a neat idea. You know, this thing that, okay, a boss will randomly place one of these things around here and you got to go stand next to it. You know, you better have high survivability. Grand Titan was working great, Solar Titan was working great for me, but it was such a great encounter, that first encounter, and especially that with the tiny room that you're in. Like the area that you fight this boss is so small. I think it's probably one of the smallest boss fights in the entire game, like smallest rooms for a boss fight in the entire game, which I think is really neat. But moving on to the second boss, that one, wow, that one was a doozy. Again, it had the same kind of mechanic of, you know, killing the blighted eyes and killing the scorn guys and standing inside of that thing. Like, again, like that's kind of a common theme throughout the dungeon, which I kind of like that they keep it the same throughout the dungeon. You know, we've seen in raids, you know, they have one mechanic for one encounter, then a different mechanic for a different encounter, and then the third mechanic uses a new encounter plus some of the first, blah blah blah, you know. But they do keep the same mechanic all throughout the dungeon, which I think is good. I think that is helpful to players. You don't need too much going on, especially when you have the number of ads, as well as bosses and boss damage, stuff like that. Like, there's a lot to keep players occupied. But with that being said, that second encounter, again, very fun. You activate them, you know, you get the fire, you take the fire to the pits. One of the things I was kind of bummed to see about this second encounter specifically was the fact that you have to go down and like deal damage next to those fire pits, so to speak. Like, that area is so big. It's got a ton of like fortifications and walls and stuff that you can hide behind. Like, how cool would it have been if you could stay back and like stay behind some of that cover and just, you know, shoot at the boss and shoot at ads and stuff like that. Like, it would have been really cool to see that happen. I'm not complaining about the boss fight, because I think forcing you up close to the boss and the boss's stomp mechanic, you know, extinguishing your damage flame, so to speak, is a really neat idea. But it would have been cool to see more use of those like fortifications just around the arena. But yeah, I think that's it for the second boss. Third boss, kind of a wild situation. I mean, there's a new mechanic added there, not difficult to understand. It's such a interesting fight. You know, the arena doesn't rotate, but that you have to rotate around, right? You've got to climb up and rotate around this arena, and you get just tons and tons of boss damage phases. And then the boss has like a final stand area where you're literally standing, sorry, spoilers, at the top of the castle, just like shooting the boss, and you got this tiny little area to run around in, and his blighted eyes just absolutely beam you. That whole fight was such a fun and engaging fight. I like to see stuff like that. Like, I like to see those fun and engaging fights, but at the same time, it doesn't thrust you into action. Like, you can take some time. You know, you don't have to shoot the blighted eyes immediately. Like, you can take some time to kill ads, get some ammo, stuff like that, which I think probably not a bad idea to do, you know. But yeah, just the damage phase on the final boss was so cool. I really enjoyed the setting of it. You know, that skeleton in the middle. It was tremendous. It was really exciting to see that. Now, there are a couple of complaints that I have with the last two bosses, and that is their health pools. Now, this is nothing new to Destiny. Like, we all know that bosses have tons and tons of health. Like, that's not unheard of. Golgoroth has a massive amount of health. Like, his health was insanely high. These dungeon bosses also have super high health pools. Like, I think this ogre here, I would assume he probably has about 20 million HP, and that is a ton of HP. Not that big of a deal, except for the fact that trying to do this solo was literally miserable, right? Because like, I'm literally stuck at a boss for like 50 minutes to an hour, right? 50 minutes to an hour on one boss, right? First boss wasn't a problem. The first boss, it took me like 4 or 5 damage phases to get through him. Like, you know, that's not an optimized perfect DPS loadout. I was using like Strand Titan, but you know, the occasion warranted that. But when you get to this boss, like, you know, I'm using Strand Titan here. This was part of the run that I did solo, right? The issue with doing it solo is just like the amount of health phases you have to go through. Like, I ended up beating him with Solar Titan, and on Solar Titan, I want to say it took me like 6 or 7 damage phases to actually kill him. And you know, again, I'm not using a perfectly optimized loadout. I'm using a solo survival loadout. I had Dragon's Breath. I had a fusion rifle on for damage. I was using, you know, an incandescent weapon as well. Just, you know, trying to do the best that I could. And survivability, I think, is right where it needs to be. Like, the survivability is perfect. You know, you've got this, you've got a bunch of ads shooting you and stuff like that. You've got to manage, you know, okay, like, I can't be in the air for too long and the boss is going to knock me off, but I also have to watch these ads. I've got to watch, you know, these Taken ads that spawn down here. I've got to be careful whenever I'm, you know, dealing damage. I've got to make sure to stun lock the boss so that he can't extinguish my flame. Like, there's a lot going on. Why do we need to have a boss with 20 million health on top of that? And I said the same thing about Ghosts of the Deep, because Ghosts of the Deep dungeon bosses had a ton of health. It was ridiculous. But Bungie, they have the ability to make these dungeons dynamic based on your fire team size, right? And we can see this perfectly in the, you know, when you're in jail, when you're in the dungeons and you're trapped in the jail cell. If you're doing it solo, you have access to all the jail cells that you need to. You can, you know, climb up through the ceiling to go to one. You can go through open doors to get to another one. If you do it with 2 players, one person has access to one side of the room, the other person has access to the other. And if you're doing it with 3 players, all 3 players are kind of, you know, locked in their independent cells, right? Why don't we have dynamic boss health damage pools? Because like, that's one of the issues. Like, 50 minutes to an hour on a boss is a ridiculously long time. And that's just one boss. Like, the final boss, same thing. Like, it took about the same time. I think it took a little bit longer on the final boss. I'm just mentioning this one because this is what I've got going on in the background here. But the final boss has a ton of health, you know, a ridiculous amount of health. And I think that for solo players, it should be difficult, but it shouldn't be like this mega time constraint. I mean, like, if you're gonna do a solo dungeon, this dungeon solo like this week, I would say set aside like 5-6 hours to do it. Right now, of course, I also don't have solo operative yet from the season pass, or I'm sorry, from the artifact. I don't have that mod yet, so that mod I know will help reduce that time. But at the same time, like, I think that for solo players, the health should be less, or they should get more of they should get a damage boost to help bring it down from like literally like a 6 phase to a 4 phase, right? Like, I'm not asking for a solo player to be able to 1, 2, or even 3 phases, but like, I think with everything optimized perfectly, a 4 phase should be viable. And I think a 4 phase is viable currently, but I mean, you really have to have everything going for you. And I think that should just be loosened up a little tiny bits, right? But yeah, that's kind of it for the dungeon, you know, and the setting and the encounters. Now, of course, I want to talk about the loot, because the loot is what is super exciting, right? The loots, first of all, let me say this. I have been very blessed to get the weapons. Like, every single run, I get all weapons. It's fantastic. Unfortunately, I don't have much of the armor, so I can't speak. Like, I know the armor looks fantastic. You know, Artifice armor from the master version of this. I mean, if you're into armor looks, that's great, because this armor, in my opinion, looks fantastic. The armor from this dungeon looks amazing on all 3 characters. But let's talk about the weapons here, because I think the weapons are a little bit of a disappointment. And I think that a lot of people kind of share a sentiment with that. But before we talk about like the bad ones, let's talk about the show stealer, which is the sidearm. I don't remember the name of it, but it's the legendary rocket sidearm, not the exotic one. That thing is an absolute monster, okay? Like I took it into, you know, I used it in this dungeon. I used it in, you know, some other areas. It is a beast. Now, granted, I have a fantastic roll. I've got beacon rounds and volt shot. Beacon rounds and volt shot. Beacon rounds, you know, makes it where your ammo will track, your shots will track enemies, and then everybody knows what volt shot does. That is an amazing combo. The sidearm itself just feels fantastic. Like it is so fun to use. It hits like a truck. I haven't used it in PvP, but in PvE, it's fantastic. But moving on from there, let's talk about the bow. The bow, I've only got a couple of rolls on the bow. I think the best roll I've got so far for like a strand build is Archer's Tempo and Hatchling. And that's, you know, there's a lot of weapons that can roll with that. And in my opinion, bows are one of those weapons, like if it's not an exotic bow, you're gonna have to have something really special to make me want to use it. You're gonna have to have something really, really special. Like the exotic bows are great, but legendary bows, I don't use legendary bows very often. When I do, I would say it's probably in PvP more. And in PvE, I mean, maybe if I have a very specific build, I'm using something like Tyranny of Heaven. Tyranny of Heaven, you know, has a really great solar roll that you can do with Dragonfly and Incandescent. But this bow, I mean, it's a strand bow. It's a precision frame, so that's good. It's not a lightweight frame. I know a lot of people don't really like lightweight frames. Like I said, the roll that I have kept is Archer's Tempo and Hatchling, which again, for a strand build, that sounds like it'd be pretty good. But at the same time, you can use Rufus's Fury with Hatchling. You could use, you know, a variety of weapons with Hatchling. Like it doesn't have to be this bow, and there's no bow artifact mods. So I don't really know. The bow doesn't tickle my fancy by any means. Yeah, I just said that. But we don't know all the rolls on all the weapons yet. They're locked in the API, so we don't know if there's, you know, if the rolls are great, if they're bad. We can't see all of them just yet. So hopefully once they're available to review the perks, we'll see some great combos. I think a really good combo on the bow would probably be Slice, the new strand perk that severs enemies after you use your class ability. That could be potentially pretty cool, right? That could be pretty cool. But outside of that, I don't really know. Again, there's a bunch of weapons this season that will roll with that perk on it. And so I think that those weapons are just going to be better than this one. But that's it for the bow. Let's talk about the sniper. I've only got, I think, one of the snipers. I got Keep Away Demolitionist. It's a 140 round per minute strand sniper. My opinion, it doesn't do anything differently based on the rolls that I've seen. It doesn't do anything differently than other snipers, right? In fact, if I'm going to use a sniper in the kinetic slot, I'm probably going to use a kinetic damage sniper like Succession, like, you know, maybe goodness, what's the name of that weapon? The one from Last Wish. I can't remember the name of it. But I'd probably end up using one of those just because kinetic damage weapons deal 5 or 10% more damage than their counterparts, right? Again, it's a sniper. Like if you want it for collection purposes, like, hey, I've got every archetype of weapon and sub-archetype of weapon in the game, sure, go for it. But other than that, I don't see a lot of value in it yet. Mind you, we don't know all the rolls yet. So once we get all the rolls, I'll take another look and see about it then. But moving on from there, we have, we talked about the sidearm, we talked about the bow, we talked about the sniper, the sword, of course, Dragon Cult Sickle. So the sword, it's really cool. We did get a caster frame strand sword, which is pretty decent. It can also roll with Surrounded. And I know a lot of people are after swords that can roll with Surrounded. You know, Bequest became super popular once Crota dropped. I could see this one being up there very high in terms of the like best swords in the game, right? Like because it has Surrounded. I don't know the other perks that it spawns with. I assume Surrounded, Relentless Strikes. There you go. That's the best bang for your buck, so to speak, right? But yeah, I mean, it's a strand caster frame sword. Again, we have other caster frames, so if we don't see something on this weapon that makes it stick out, it's just going to be another sword, right? So, you know, the armor looks great. The weapons, I think the weapons are really being carried by that legendary sidearm. Of course, I don't have the exotic yet. I haven't been lucky enough to get that. on my first character, which I've only done it on my Titan. I haven't actually tried it on my Warlock or my Hunter yet. So hopefully maybe I'll get it tomorrow or the next day on Warlock or Hunter. But that being said, I've heard a lot of people, I've seen some reviews of it. It doesn't look too exciting to me. The biggest thing that comes to mind about it is I think it could make some non-void builds really strong. Okay, because you put this on, you get rapid multi-kills or rapid kills, whatever it is, get Devour going, and you can keep Devour up. On Strand Titan, having Devour active, as well as things like Banner of War, Woven Mail, like you're literally like have the potential to be invincible. Okay, and that sounds pretty cool. Same thing like Arc Warlock with Devour that can just get a ton of kills, get, you know, that grenade energy back, all that stuff. It sounds like it could be really awesome. Right, and I think that's going to be the strong suit of this sidearm, is you have access to these void verbs without using void, and I think that's the main draw of it. But other than that, so like I said, I don't have it yet, so I haven't been able to test it. But yeah, that's kind of it for the dungeon. That's the weapons. We talked about the weapons, the loot, the setting, things that I, you know, really liked about it. A couple things I didn't like about it. Of course, the key points here: the armor looks great. The legendary sidearm is so much fun and so good, and the aesthetic of the whole dungeon is top tier. But the downsides of it are, you know, the bosses have a ton of health. The other weapons from this dungeon haven't really piqued my interest very much yet. Again, that could change in the future, but yeah, that's your TLDR, I guess. I want to hear your thoughts though. I'm sure a lot of you have probably done it. What are your thoughts? Do you think it's good? Do you think it's bad? What was your favorite part? What's your favorite weapon? Also, throw your rolls on the weapons that you got down in the comments too, because I want to see what some of these rolls are. Like, I hate waiting on the API, which will probably not update till Tuesday, so we can see the perks, but I want to know kind of some of the perks that you can get. Look for good combos, stuff like that. Sorry. Blah, blah, blah. But yeah, that being said, that's it for me. Like the video, subscribe for more daily Destiny content, and do me a favor, watch the videos you see on the end screen, because for whatever reason, YouTube thinks you'll like them. Guys, I'll see y'all next time. Bye for now.